This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
What's up, everybody? Happy Wednesday to you. Ira Winderman in Boston. Clay Ferraro here in Plantation as the Heat get set to take on the Boston Celtics tonight. And Ira, this is a little bit different feeling for a show than we've had over the first few months that we've done this program, I would say.
You know, it is and it isn't, because we've always seen this sort of blips along the way, Clay. It's not that unusual. And honestly, I'm glad we're joined today, you know, for the Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint after a win, because if it was 5 in a row, I mean, I can see why Big O's already blowing us off. I get that. He'd lose 4 of the last 5. He's like, guys, I'll be back when it's time to start the ride in the gravy train again. But you know what, Clay, I think it's important. If lessons are learned, if the Heat can gain something from that losing streak, I have no issue with it. And what we saw on Monday night at FTX Arena, I think you'd agree with this, Clay, was sort of game-changing, right? That the way they changed the rotation, they changed the lineup. I think we both had sort of one of those, whoa, what's going on here type of moments when the starting lineup was announced with Max Strus instead of Duncan Robinson. And all of a sudden, when the great Victor Oladipo and Markieff Morris comeback tours were put aside, so you know what? If it opens some eyes, perfect. And tonight, here in Boston, against the Celtics, is the perfect litmus test.
It's amazing to think back. I mean, the last time we did this show, we hadn't even had timeout gate yet. I mean, that's how long ago it was that we hadn't even seen that blow up in the huddle. So we're going to kind of go through the last week, and I want to spin this forward as well and kind of say, okay,
sure,
what have we learned over the last few weeks, and how does this now change, if it does, your feelings about what this team is going to end up doing in the playoffs? But hey, let's start off the top. After what we've seen, even with the Sacramento win the other night, Ira Winderman, are you hitting the panic button on this Miami Heat season?
I don't think I was hitting the panic button at all anyway, because I understand with veterans, you get the dog days of the season. With P.J. Tucker at 36 and a Kyle Lowry at 36, I think they're at the point, okay, we're going to have home court in the first round of the playoffs. We know that it's going to get tougher from here. And I think there was sort of that natural letdown of we fought the good fight. And I told this to Big O when we did our accurate Pembroke Pines report on Monday. This has been a team all season that has been looking for its motivation and finding its motivation. We're shorthanded and we still win. You remember that, Clay. December and January, they were feeling themselves. We were climbing toward first place. We're going to get there. They got there to first place. And I think with the doubters along the way, you know, whether they were just contenders and nothing more. So when you achieve all your goals, when you prove people wrong, when you get to first place, when you overcome adversity, I think as the Heat stood on the top of the East, they said to themselves, mission accomplished. And I think there was a sense that for the regular season, maybe it was somewhat of a mission accomplished situation. So I think that's why it was important for them to sort of get this, I don't know if I say kick in the ass, but this little bit of a jolt. I think this could help. Dwayne Wade spoke about it last night on TNT in their pregame show, and the whole Jimmy Butler, Spoelstra, Udonis Haslem spat. Like, I've seen that on great teams. So now we wait to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I wasn't as bothered by what happened in the huddle, because I feel like this is something that it gets overblown, because it does happen a lot. Now, most of the time it does happen behind closed doors. You don't see it quite as publicly. And you know, look, it is jarring when you see people who are pulling towards the same goal going at each other that hard. It is jarring when you hear a coach say to his star player, what, do you want me to fight you? Which, if you read the lips and read some of the transcripts from people, you had all these professional lip readers. It is jarring, and you understand that. But you also understand that these are people that have a maniacal level of competitiveness, and it's what makes them great to start.
Right.
So that wasn't the big problem to me. It was what happened after that. And not so much the loss to Golden State, because, look, they came back and they won that game. And yet, they came back and they took the lead in that game, but they lost ultimately. But it was mostly what happened the next game. You go and you take on a bad Knicks team. You have a big lead. You blow that. So that malaise that confrontation was supposed to break, you let set in again. It was taking on a Brooklyn Nets team that we had heard Eric Spoelstra after the loss against Philadelphia, for example. You have the game against Golden State, where Eric Spoelstra said, yeah, I'm not going to take anything away from them. I'm not going to take anything away from Philadelphia, because I think you may have asked the question about when you find out that Joel Embiid isn't playing and James Harden isn't playing,
Right.
is there kind of that natural letdown factor? And he said, but yeah, the natural competitor, that natural competitor in you has to come out for the Brooklyn Nets. And you got absolutely waxed in that game. Understanding Spo wasn't out there, but talent took over. So my problem, Ira, wasn't that you had the confrontation. It's that it didn't seem to shake you up enough to just naturally go out there and break through the malaise that clearly you had hit at this point of the season, the dog days, as you put it.
Well, and here's the thing, though, is the one thing that sort of got to me through this whole thing was, and I know this is almost the worst condemnation you can offer, is how much does it mean to these guys? And I think right now the sense was from last week, the regular season only means so much. That it's interesting. The fan base celebrated when they moved into first place. You know, like, we're looking down on all you. Oh, so we're beaten Harden. Where were you guys? Celtics, where were you? Oh, the haughty Nets with Kyrie, even just at road games, and Durant. You know, we're looking down at you. And then I think the Heat took their foot off the gas pedal. So the question becomes, can you get that gas going again? Can you get back into fifth gear? And here's the problem for the Heat. I think Eric Spoelstra had enough doubts, and Clay, this is important. I think Eric Spoelstra felt the need that he had to shake things up. And the fact that Eric Spoelstra, sort of had to do that does make me pull back a little and does make me say, whoa. I thought if they are pros, they figure it out on their own. They don't need a kick in the ass. They don't need some sort of jump start. Who are you? What are you? And I think because of that, Eric Spoelstra came in, and, he missed the game on Saturday, family first. One of his, sons had a procedure. He had to be away from the team, but he still took the time on Sunday to rethink everything. So that's the thing is, first place wasn't good enough, because first place Eric Spoelstra said this. He said, even before the losing streak, these were things that were seeping in. And Clay, how many times did the Heat win? And you and I would come on here every Wednesday and talk about, that was a little bit tenuous. That fourth quarter, not so good. And there were concerns about that. This is a dramatic shake-up. This is changing the starting lineup that Ira Winderman for months told Orlando Alzugaray they would never do because of Duncan Robinson and what he meant to the starting lineup. This was you and I coming here every Wednesday talking about, wait till Victor Oladipo gets back. Wait till they have the secret weapon. Who can defend?
He's the big trade deadline acquisition. Yeah.
Right. They don't need to do anything. And, Markieff Morrison, he looked good in his first couple of games when he came back. But then you can see there were too many moving parts. And I've said this from the start. It is a wonderful concept to say that anyone and everyone can contribute. It is a great thing that you can look up and down the roster and saying, hey, we've got a bunch of contributors there. We can make it work. But eventually you have to find your core. You have to say, these 8 guys, these 9 guys are going to be the guys. And it really was interesting because Eric Spoelstra came in Monday before that game against the Kings at shoot-around, and he basically said, and Clay, to me, this is fascinating, to 8 or 9 guys, you, and you are the guys. And by default, you are not the guys anymore. And I'm really curious. I'm going to be heading to shoot around in a couple of minutes here after our show. And I'm really curious, how did that affect Vic? How did that affect Markieff? How did it affect Duncan to a degree? What happens when Caleb comes back tonight? Anthony Chang in the Miami Herald noted this will be the first time, possibly if Caleb Martin is back, all 15 players on the standard roster will be available. Clay Ferraro, I posit this to you. Is that necessarily a good thing, and the good thing we thought it would be all season?
It is if you're willing to make the tough decision that Eric Spoelstra made the other day. It is not if you feel like this is your youth league team and everybody gets to play. And so I think and again, maybe that's the silver lining in this, the blessing in this. And you and I talked about this for a while, that Eric Spoelstra was going to go into the lab between that last regular season game and game 1 of the playoffs, where you had that extended period of time, and kind of tinker and see, okay, what do I need to do to make this team the best possible team that it can be? It almost felt like he sped up that process, that after what he had seen in the regular, that maybe some of the things that he was thinking about potentially, and that doesn't mean that he's not going to make more changes. in between game 82 and game 1 of the playoffs. But I do think that he kind of sped that up. So
let me ask you this because I saw the crying here at the bottom of whether it's panic time. So let me ask you this, Clay. Was it panic time? In other words, we all went through Monday thinking everything's copacetic, right? Until we saw the lineup and saw the rotation change. Do you think what Eric Spoelstra did signaled a panic or signaled common sense or somewhere on the line? In other words, over here, let me get in the frame here. Over here is panic and over here is common sense. Do you think it's one or the other, or do you think it's somewhere in between when you saw that amount of dramatic shifts?
I think it's a healthy panic. And I don't panic. It's weird because like you use that word because frankly, it's because the word that I sent for us to use this morning. But I think it's one of those where you basically looked at this and said, this is not working. And look, I say it's a healthy panic because you recognize that, oh, let's just work through this with the guys we have and see what happens on the other side. It wasn't going to cut it. And you're also flirting with that dangerous position where, look, you don't want to end up where you're like having to win a game to avoid the 2 seed, right? And you don't necessarily want to drop all the way to 4 and then like put your fate in the hands of going and playing the 1 seed potentially in the second round of the playoffs. And you don't want to just rely on those few days leading up to game 1 of the playoffs. So I would say it is a healthy level of panic that you clearly looked at this and you said, what we are doing is not working. So to me, panic isn't necessarily like you start running around like the SpongeBob SquarePants GIFs that you see on Twitter, everybody like waving their hands and stuff. It's this isn't working and we need to fix it. We need to do something immediately drastic to make sure that this doesn't keep happening. And I feel like that's exactly what we saw. So moving forward, Ira, and we're going to talk about the Duncan Robinson benching because that's what it was. It was a demotion. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But I saw something with this team, and in particular after the Wednesday night loss to Golden State where you had that blow up, and it was something really interesting to me. Take me to your leader. Who is the leader of this Miami Heat team? I think we know who it is supposed to be, but I think we're starting to see a little bit of a shift in who may be the leader of this team. But I want to get your take, and then I'll give mine.
You know, I think it was supposed to be Jimmy Butler, but Jimmy Butler can be so wildly erratic, and I don't want to say into himself, but gets caught in his feelings. And he gets so into his feelings that I think he sort of goes to the side a little. I would have thought a little more it would have been Kyle Lowry, because that's what he was brought in for. When you bring in a player who's 35 when you sign him to a 3-year, $85 million contract, you damn well better be banking on that veteran experience, or else why did you sign the oldest free agent basically out there on the market? I see some of Bam Adebayo, and I think he can get emotional at times, but I think he's still sort of playing the young guy role in trying to fit in a little bit. I think it has to be Kyle Lowry, because I think Jimmy is too emotional and honestly too off on his own at times for him to be the leader. So maybe what we've really hit after all of this is Kyle Lowry time, that his time is now. We saw what he did in 2019 with the Toronto Raptors. Yes, that was Kawhi Leonard's team. But you know what? Matter of fact, that's the perfect example. The 2019 Toronto Raptors NBA championship team was Kawhi Leonard's team. But Kawhi is a quiet, soft-spoken, almost the anti-Jimmy Butler. Jimmy's over here. He's way too emotional. You know, you have someone like Kawhi who's down here who you barely can hear his voice, and when he laughs, it's kind of creepy. But at least, you know, you sort of know that you need someone else. I think that's what Kyle Lowry is. And I think he's the guy who's going to have to settle this team right now. Hopefully he's done with his personal issues and can be with the team full-time. We still don't know that for sure. But I think it has to be Kyle. And Kyle was almost sort of the half and half, the creamer that was brought in to sort of smooth over Jimmy Butler's rough edges, because we've seen it go to crap with Jimmy, with Fred Hoiberg in Chicago. We've seen it get ugly with that practice session in Minnesota, and even with his beloved Tom Thibodeau turn sideways there. And we saw in Philadelphia where he clearly wanted to get out of there when he joined the Heat in free agency in 2019. So long-winded, but I guess I would say it would have to be Kyle, because I don't know who else it would be.
So let me tell you why it's Kyle. And this was fascinating to me. I'm not giving away company secrets here because Eric Reed mentioned it on the broadcast the other night. Kyle Lowry does not talk to the media. Kyle Lowry, and what he said during the broadcast was, he said, look, Kyle talks all the time on the floor. He doesn't talk very much to the media. He hadn't up until last week. And it wasn't something where he's rude. He just he doesn't seem to have much use for it when you're talking about just the day-to-day, asking the same silly questions over and he just doesn't have much use for it. After that incident on Wednesday, and you're the same, I know you were there, Ira, and I think we all sit there and we wait and we're like, who are we going to hear from about this? Who is the first person who's going to step up? And normally it's Eric Spoelstra, who's the first person that goes up to the microphone and starts talking about what happened in the game and what happened in the fourth quarter. After we had rarely heard from Kyle Lowry all season, Kyle Lowry was the first one to walk up, grab the microphone, and answer the tough questions about what happened in that huddle. And he wasn't even involved in it, but he was the first. He recognized in that moment, this team needs somebody to step up. And I'm not trying to make too much of that one moment, but I do feel like it was interesting that he was the first one to go up there, even ahead of Eric Spoelstra. And we didn't hear from Jimmy Butler about this until what, Monday night after the Kings game?
Yeah, and finally when ESPN asked about it, because they're carrying tonight's game against the Celtics, so they want to get more into it. The one thing I'll say is this, is I think a little bit of that was logistics. I think Eric Spoelstra realized he needed to cool off a little bit. That 10 minutes wasn't enough time for him to go from humbling loss to the media and be himself. So the timing was, God wanted to get the hell out of there. I'll sort of take people into how the sauce is made. After about 6 minutes to go in each game, the traveling media for the Heat or send a text from the Heat, who would you like to talk to? And we list our names. And in that game, we listed Kyle, we listed Jimmy, and we listed Udonis. It made sense. You wanted to hear the protagonist of the fight. But we also wanted to hear from sort of that veteran leadership voice. And I do disagree with Eric Reed to an extent from this. Kyle has mostly during the regular season made himself available when we requested him.
And let me. I shouldn't have put it in those terms. What he said was the context of it. Before, I know we love aggregation, right? But the context of it was Kyle was like talking nonstop on the floor because he always does,
yes,
right? And it was one of those where he was yelling at the referee,
sure.
He was yelling at teammates, and what Eric Reed said was, hey, Kyle may not talk much off the floor, he may not talk much, when it comes to interviews and such. But on the floor, he doesn't stop talking. It was a compliment.
And it was more in those contexts. And he doesn't suffer fools. So your other point was valid. It was coaching. Yes. If you're going to do the typical post-game presser with Kyle, what happened on this play? Why did you do that? Yes. He was like, because I'm a basketball player, and we did that. Or without condescending, because I know what we were trying to do, and you don't, because you weren't in our huddle, you weren't in our shoot-around, you weren't in our practice, that he doesn't suffer. But ask him to do the inhale and take in a question and break it down to something he knows how to do.
Yes.
He was spectacular on Wednesday after that game.
Fantastic.
I agree. He told us what it meant. It was very good also. PJ Tucker came out. Basically, the Heat hand selected.
Did something happen here?
Yes, and he's like, look at me in the picture. I'm laughing. I've seen it. This ain't no big deal, and I don't want to get my hands dirty and get involved. And he was so honest about it. So what we got is the really strong voices of the team. That's the thing, though. Jimmy will be Jimmy. Jimmy will be emotional. His emotion in 2020 carried this team within 2 games of a championship. But his emotion also can be toxic. And that's what you have to worry about from the other end. And that's what we're going to see going forward. Was that exactly what we needed? That pressure valve opening and all the steam coming out and Jimmy's frustrations with Spo and Udonis and the way things are going and the losing. If that's the case, Clay, that was a wonderful moment. But if that was the first of many, then that's a concern. And so you see people, well, look, you've seen this, Clay. We've seen this all over, in social media. That he'd need to get rid of Jimmy. That Jimmy outlasts his welcome everywhere. That after 3 years or so, it's tough to stay with Jimmy because of his emotional swings. Well, now we'll see what Jimmy's made of also. And if that's just a moment in time when we do the championship parade and you're sitting there with Will Manso on one of the floats riding down Biscayne and you're talking to Will and saying, hey, that Jimmy Butler moment against Golden State is when everything turned. God bless the Heat, and that's what Dwayne Wade said last night on TNT. But if we're not just talking about that moment, and we're saying, Ira, what about that blow up in the first round against Chicago with Jimmy? Was that toxic? What happened when you lost it in the second round and they went down to the Bucks and were swept out again? Is that the end of Jimmy? If this is one moment in time, Clay Ferraro, I'm all for it. It's going to be in your book when you try to outsell me after the championship, and I'm fine with that. But if there's more of them, there won't be a championship.
So, and we're up against a break, but I'm not just trying to make a lot of what happened after the game, and I'm not trying to make us self-important as far as who talks to the media. This is more about Kyle Lowry doing something that he normally hadn't done when it comes to, hey, jumping up and being the first guy. And I get what you're saying as far as the logistics of it, but you mentioned that you requested 3 players. Right. Kyle Lowry, Jimmy Butler, Udonis Haslem. Who's the only one out of those 3 who talked? And look, Udonis Haslem, it gives us time of any time you ask for Udonis Haslem, he talked. You can understand why that night he was not in the mindset to do it. He was not in the frame of mind to come and have a lose. You can completely understand that. I feel like this is kind of a shift where we're going back to what Kyle Lowry told us in the very first Q&A that we had with him when he joined the Miami Heat. He said, look, I understand what Jimmy Butler is like. Sometimes it's my job to go there and kind of be the good cop. It's my job to kind of stand up and say, okay, if Jimmy's yelling at somebody, I can pull that player, or in this case, maybe that coach, aside and say, look, this is, everybody's heated right now. This is what we're pushing towards. Let me put in a nicer way what Jimmy Butler just screamed at you with a few expletives so that we can kind of get to where we're trying to get. All right, coming up after the break, I want to talk about this rotation stuff. Duncan Robinson demoted. What does this mean for the rest of the regular season, but also as we head towards the playoffs? That and a lot more coming up right here on Inside the Paint.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.